Everyone, Petrik here. Today's video will be another spoiler-free book review of another upcoming fantasy debut. This one will be for The Failures by Benjamin Lyer, and I hope that this will be on your radar because I do think that this is one of the contenders for the best fantasy debut of 2024. And who knows, maybe with time, with the passing of time, maybe this will indeed be my pick for the best fantasy debut of 2024. But yeah, The Failures is an extremely ambitious, rewarding and meticulously constructed debut novel. Finding a new epic fantasy debut from a new fantasy author in the traditional publishing right now, it is relatively rare. At the time of this review, traditional publishing seems to prefer cozy fantasy and romantasy most. But even if the state of publishing is favoring epic fantasy, a debut as twisted, ambitious, and rewarding as The Failures by Benjamin Lyer would still be a once-in-a-blue-moon moment. The Failures was originally not in my radar. It was never in my radar. I didn't even know about this book until I received an email from Matt Bieler, the literary agent of Petrik, Ted Williams, and many other authors, including Benjamin Lyer. Matt Bieler asked me to put The Failures on my list of books to read and watch out for in 2024 because he and Daw Books believe reading this book felt like encountering The Name of the Wind for the first time again. The Name of the Wind is one of my favorite books of all time, and even though The Failures is a very different kind of books compared to The Name of the Wind, hearing that kind of statement from Rothfuss agent and publishers means that I must not pass this one up. Additionally, Ted Williams and also Ruocchio, two of my favorite authors, sang their echoing praise for this book. And I am in awe of the huge scope that Lyer has prepared for this book and trilogy. The official premise says it nicely. The Failures is the first book in the Wanderlands trilogy by Benjamin Lyer. It is a genre-breaking blend of post-apocalyptic sci-fi and epic fantasy about a scattered group of unlikely heroes traveling across their broken mechanical planet to stave off eternal darkness. The Wanderlands, a vast machine made for reasons unknown, was broken long ago. First when the sky, splintering and cracking, and then very slowly, the whole machine, the whole world, began to go dark. Following the summons of a strange dream, a scattering of adventurous degenerates and children find themselves drawn toward the same place, the vast underground keep. They will discover there that they have been called for a purpose, and that purpose could be the destruction of everything they love. For below the keep, imprisoned in the greatest cage ever built by magicians and gods, lies the buried giant, Kindaya Destrin. It is the most powerful of its kind, and its purpose is the annihilation of all civilization. But any kind of power, no matter how terrible, is precious in the dimming Wanderlands, and those that crave it are making their moves. All machines can be broken and the final cracks are spreading. It will take only the careless actions of two cheerful monsters to tip the Wanderlands toward an endless dark or help it find its way back to the light. Where should I begin reviewing a book like The Failures? It is difficult to choose where to start. I can tell you right from the first chapter, I was instantly reminded of From Software's Dark Souls series, one of my favorite series of games of all time. The utility of bonfire in the land of absolute darkness in the first chapter, and then having this as a recurring implementation in the unconventional narrative throughout the whole book, made The Failures far from what I would categorize as accessible for new readers of the genre. It is relatively demanding. The narrative doesn't hold your hand. Terminologies and the story structure require your attention, and the book will shift the gears of your mind to work, keep asking questions, and solve the answers on its own. For those of you who feels that new epic fantasy lately and as seldom as they are published now tend to handhold the readers too much, this is the book for you. Every chapter, terminology, and revelations I learned from understanding the subtleties and context astonished me repeatedly. When you think about it, the premise of the novel, as I said, for a lack of better words, is so cool in its premise and execution. Lyer's intricate world building is without a doubt one of the primary strengths of The Failures. Having a story taking place in a land of darkness where light is precious, and then the existence of a complex and massive city hidden underneath an insanely vast mountain with a supposedly extinct giant with the capability of destroying or saving the world made The Failures a unique reading experience. When I was reading the book, I kept thinking there is no way this kind of novel and world building is conjured in the span of a year or two. And I was proven right when I read the acknowledgement at the end of the book. Benjamin Lyer said the conception of the ideas behind the failures began 30 years ago. And I am not surprised by this. Arcane energies, automata, the behemoth, possibly multiple worlds, ancient weapons, portal fort sword, and mysterious characters with legendary deeds, and many more. The rich world building, history, and plotting behind the failures with the themes of darkness and light, redemption, family, ambition, and friendship is rigorous and mind-blowing. Something worth doing is worth your time doing well, and Lyer is certain that. Mysteries were constantly evoked from every POV chapter, and Lyer ramps up the storytelling quality with more questions and answers. With new answers I gained, new questions spurred in my mind. This is owed to how intriguing and engaging the storylines were. From my experience, I wouldn't categorize the failures as a character-driven novel, and that is usually an issue for me. The narrative is told through the perspective of several POV characters, and there is an omniscient tone and execution to the storytelling. Some parts of the narration slightly reminded me of reading The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This puts the characters at the risk of feeling distant. Thankfully, the tone and the focus of the narrative are always centered on the POV characters within a certain group. Plotting is one of the most significant aspects of the failures. The story is divided into several groups of characters. First, we have the perspective of Sophie, Versace, and her companions, the killers. Despite being foul-mouthed, reckless, and rude, Sophie's protectiveness and faith toward her group of friends, such as Bear, Trick, etc., named the killers was really good. Like Sophie, we readers are trying to find the answers to many questions in the story together. I wouldn't dub the killers as my favorite storyline though. My favorite storylines in the failures are the perspective of the monsters, the convox or cabal, and the lost boys. And every one of them has their respective feel and strengths. The monsters, the tale of Gunnar Anderson and Jakey, felt more post-apocalyptic than the other. But the darkness and stakes in their story felt powerful and palpable. Their decision and careless actions with their sword and walking sticks in the face of deadly automata and overwhelming darkness would be crucial to the state of the Wanderlands. I was always excited to be back reading Gunnar and Jakey's story. It felt like I was reading the prose version of Tsutomu Nihei's work, the mangaka responsible for Blame and Knights of Sidonia. And I guess, in a way, the same can also be applied to The Lost Boys, which is essentially a coming-of-age story of James and Chris Desson under the tutelage of Alvarez. Coming of age is always one of my favorite tropes in science fiction and fantasy, and it was easy for me to get used to their story. The themes of brotherhood, the death of innocence, and childhood are explored heavily here. Finally, we have the first POV chapter of the novel, The Convox or the Cabal. It would not be far-fetched to say this is like witnessing the perspective and scheming of the main villains, Winter, Candle, Wes, Dale, Primary Grey, of the failures. I wish I could talk about the best aspects of these POV characters in more detail, but there is a bit of an issue in trying to explain their magnificence as spoiler-free as possible. The failures is one of those circumstances where I believe the less you know about these characters, the better your reading experience will be, but rest assured, it is all brilliant. Although they might feel disjointed at first, intentionally, all of their tales are gradually leading toward a grand convergence. Actually, there is one more POV chapter in the failures, the Deathsmith. Your miles may vary, but unfortunately the Deathsmith is the only POV character that did not click with me. Not as much as the previous four I mentioned. Even though similar to them, the Deathsmith story converged eventually as well, it is too bad I found only the last two chapters of his storyline engaging enough to enjoy. The convergence also did not feel as satisfying as how the narrative converged in the other four POV chapters. This was the only criticism I had with the book. But again, this is a very personal take. I am sure other readers will feel differently about this. Overall, I was thoroughly impressed. I have no doubt rereading The Failures will be an entirely new reading experience compared to the first time reading it. If the pleasure of the first time reading the novel is in decoding how the twisted labyrinth fits together, the second time reading with all the knowledge acquired will be to have a deeper understanding of the author's vision and storytelling. More than 40 well-written passages for my next perusals. The Failures is a complex complex, ambitious, and madness of a puzzle designed carefully. It was as if this debut novel was penned by a veteran in the SFF genre. Story and chronology structure-wise, the closest popular science fantasy book I can think of is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin and Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. Blame by Tsutomu Nihei is the closest vibe and tone I felt from reading the novel. As the author mentioned at the end of the book, he borrowed elements from so many giant literary authors in the SFF genre, such as Ted Williams, Ursula K. Le Guin, Dan Simmons, Stephen King, Bujold, Glenn Cook, Stephen Donaldson, China Miéville, Tsutomu Nihei, and more. Through them, Benjamin Layer became the incredible architect who renovated the failures into his own distinct work of art. It is a novel 30 years in the making, and the ending of the failures exhibited that the endgame has only just begun. Multiple plot threads have converged, and the fate of the Wanderlands will be decided in the remaining books of the trilogy. I, for one, am excited to have this kind of ambitious debut novel still being published by a new author, and I definitely will read the sequels whenever they are ready. And yeah, I think that's my spoiler-free thoughts on The Failures by Benjamin Layer. I assume many of you haven't heard about this book as well, and I strongly recommend you to put it on your radar, especially if you love something that is a bit more challenging. You love solving puzzles and also finding answers in the narrative, finding hidden clues, and find pleasure in solving them. I know right now I still have a lot of questions regarding what happened in The Failures, and really I look forward to reading the sequels whenever they are ready. So yeah, I think that's really it from me today. Do let me know what you think about the premise of this novel. Do you think this book sounds interesting to you or not? Do you plan to pick up this book? As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye-bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting me.